Thank you very much. I'm a little bit of the outlier tonight because I am focused on that income part of the equation of affordability. I think it's phenomenal and wonderful that there's so many folks here who are focused on housing. We obviously need support for affordable housing and shelter. I'm interested in thinking about how more people can earn enough money to afford the housing that they need. I'm going to propose to you that a really key aspect of sustainability is work. Two scholars that I admire a great deal in Europe, Littig and Griesler, published a piece in the International Journal of Sustainable Development in 2005 where they're making the case that work is really the site of the interface between society and nature. So if you think about then this is the most academic slide, I promise. If you think about the way in which our late modern capitalist society really destroys the natural world that we're all a part of and puts people out on the street and makes it difficult for them to find shelter and afford the things that they need, these authors are saying, you know, the interface between the way that society is destroying our natural world is really the nature of the work that we do, whether it is paid or unpaid, whether it's visible or invisible, whether it's sustainable and secure or insecure and not enough of it. So I'm going to kind of back up a little bit. As an interdisciplinary scholar, I occasionally like to wear different hats, and I'm going to pretend to be an economist very briefly because I certainly am not one. But I do recall taking Econ 101 as an undergrad, and maybe some of you have as well, and you'll be familiar with what we refer to as a supply and demand curve. So a lot of what we're hearing about tonight and talking about with good reason is the supply of affordable housing as a kind of definition of affordability. I want to suggest that we also need to be thinking about the demand curve and the ability of, so we know there's demand for housing, but in economics we talk about people's ability to pay as part of what signals demand and moves markets. So we're going to have different availability of goods and services and, in fact, housing if more people in our city and in our region have the capacity to reliably invest in what they need. And so from an economic standpoint, the purchasing power of households, the ability of us from a government and a civil society perspective to strengthen the ability of households to compete and to engage, the argument basically that people need that economic capacity in order to make our regions affordable. So, what does that economic capacity look like currently? It might not surprise you to know, and these graphics and the data that support them are from the South Sound Alliance, which is run through the School of Urban Studies. Dr. Ali Modares, Matt Cito is the kind of tech genius who helps to pull this stuff together and make the graphics. This is the household income distribution in Pierce County. And so what you'll see, again, probably not surprising, is that there are very few people in this kind of 80 to 100K zone, which is where you really need to be to qualify for a mortgage and get one of these nice fancy single-family homes in our city, and an awful lot of folks clustered down here in the 0 to 20, 25, 30 range. So we know that people aren't making enough money. And then the other slide that I wanted to share with you is the nature of the occupation comparison. So the money that is being made, more or less, is in management, business, science, and arts currently. And I want to propose to you that there's a real opportunity here in production, transportation, moving materials, natural resources, construction, and maintenance. That if we want to put more people to work in the long-term jobs that are going to go to affordability, it's those bars on the right end of the slide where we can make investments potentially and grow our job base. The other really important thing to consider here is that in our city, so this bit is from Tacoma itself, 17% of the entire population is living below the poverty line. Over 12% of families live below the poverty line. Over 20% of foreign-born individuals live below the poverty line. We're supposed to be a welcoming city here in Tacoma, right? And an awful lot of folks who are from here are also living below the poverty line, over 16%. The other thing to keep in mind is that the racial demographics are changing, and the empirical social science is very clear that people who enjoy residential privilege, who are predominantly white households, really defend their privilege, and they defend access to opportunities in ways that make it very difficult sometimes for other growing demographics, such as African American, Latin American, Native American, and other ethnic minorities who are currently composing the demographics of this region make it really difficult to access opportunities. So if indeed we're able to address affordability by growing economic opportunities in these sectors, moving more of these folks into higher income households, we also need to do it with a targeted attention to who gets access to those opportunities and how we are potentially redistributing that income. Okay, so there's lots of great people working on workforce development in the region. This is a snip from the Workforce Central page. They had a great report that came out earlier this year on the nature of work in our region. Also a lot of great information about automation, artificial intelligence. There are an awful lot of jobs that are disappearing. We know this. And so one question is, well, is this a space issue? Like, this is a design gathering, right? Where people are architects, designers. And so what I want to suggest to you is that it absolutely is. Because design, zoning, and spatial planning can really enable this region to grow living wage jobs. That if the folks at Workforce Central and the sectors that they're identifying and the opportunities for growing new jobs don't have industrial zone lands and they don't have the kind of policy advocacy and spaces to grow these sectors, we're not going to see the job growth that we need. So there's definitely a space component to growing that kind of long-term stable employment base. So for all you designers, I'm going to kind of back off from the public policy and economic analysis. Anybody recognize these images? Go. Alvar Aalto, yes. So the vase on the left, the stools on the right, one of many designs that this famous Finnish architect designed, kind of Scandinavian modern design. This is an image of the Viipuri City Library that was renovated in 2014, one of my favorites. But a lot of his iconic spaces, just gorgeous. And I picked this image because I think it speaks to some of the materials of our region as well that we're quite proud of, rightfully so, the kind of undulating wooden ceiling. But something that very few people know about Alvar Aalto is that a lot of his first commissions were from the state and they were from industry. That in Finland, at the time that he was practicing, when he was getting his career started, there was a recognition that people were taking manufacturing jobs and needed places to live as well as places to work. And so I take a lot of inspiration. This is a page from a catalog at the Museum of MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York, an exhibit that was staged over 20 years ago. I think it was 1998 on Aalto's work. But it was interesting to me to find that he did an awful lot of planning around manufacturing and industrial development. And so the idea of workforce housing that's integrated into manufacturing job growth opportunities. So imagine for a minute if we had industrial space, because I think in the US we've had this long history of residential and industrial zoning that like they never come together. Imagine if we had industrial spaces that also included workforce housing and transportation access. If mixed use development here, instead of just being about like retail and commercial and housing all mixed up together, what if we saw industrial and manufacturing innovation supported in these spaces and really push the needle or push the envelope in the city of Tacoma? Building on Katie's presentation on the missing middle, which is brilliant, and I love the idea of empowering more and different people to be developers. There's also a missing middle class, which most of us know and have experienced in our own families and trajectories, perhaps. That job-secure middle-income households are a dying entity in this country, and that unless more and different people are able to rely upon stable employment for themselves and their families, no amount of affordable housing is going to solve the affordability problem. Thank you. The other thing that we know is that as green industrial innovation is taking place, it oftentimes is accruing benefits to elites. So the people who already have money, who already are financing these developments, are just making more money. It's not putting different people to work. So can we have green innovation without gentrification? This is a little bit about me. I run the community planning program at UW Tacoma. Our new report on urban waterfronts and planning for industry has just come out. And in 2019, my colleague Mark Pendris and I were co-instructors of this studio that is making some of these claims, and in particular looking to the Tideflats and the Theophos waterway as the kind of transition and buffer zone between the cultural revitalization district of downtown, lots of like hot, great new development that's happened here over the last 20 years. The port has done a brilliant job of maintaining their container shipping capacity. We are one of the most competitive ports in North America. And so there's a real opportunity in between these two zones to not be one or the other, but to look to the future and to develop new kinds of jobs, new spaces, and put more people to work. Because when more people are working, there's more affordability. I'm going to finish up with this slide, a little bit more about me. Again, School of Urban Studies. As you know and you have heard, the Tideflats sub-area plan is going to really get started and kick off in the spring. We think it'll take plenty of time. To really think about this plan as not just the purview of technocrat planners and or industrial advocates. It is a major undertaking on the part of the city, the port, and the Puyallup tribe. Really important opportunity. I also want to point out the leadership of Citizens for a Healthy Bay from my perspective, thinking about just transitions in the Tideflats, of really standing up for what could be a new and different future, not only that faces climate change and addresses the health of our sound, but really is not about shutting down industry, but rather looking for new and different industrial jobs and innovation. I think I probably went over. I'm sorry.